The incredible talent of the Dutch pilot and aircraft designer Anthony Fokker can be judged at least by one fact. He built his first airplane, the Spin, in the year 1910 when he was only 19 years old. Later, while living in Germany, he achieved great success in the production of fighter aircraft. Fokker airplanes of various models fought very successfully on the fronts of the First World War. But after Germany's defeat, the production of combat aircraft was banned there, and in the year 1919, Anthony returned to his historical homeland to Holland. In Amsterdam, he organized the Fokker Aviation factory, transporting from Germany all the necessary equipment, aircraft engines, and components intending to expand production. Fortune smiled upon the young entrepreneur. In the year 1920, a major airline, KLM, was created in the Netherlands, under whose auspices the first regular air route, Amsterdam to London, was opened. It was served by transport aircraft converted from bombers. The Fokker Company actively participated in this work. Such successful beginnings brought the company the recognition and reputation essential in business. In a short time, Anthony became a major entrepreneur and aircraft manufacturer. In just a few years, he succeeded in turning a small aircraft plant into a large industrial enterprise. It must be said that Anthony Fokker, like any true aircraft designer, dreamed of building an airplane that would become popular throughout the world. And he succeeded. The Vickers Vimy, whose transatlantic flight made a real sensation among aviators of all countries, gave the young engineer much to think about. However, Fokker was not going to copy the Vickers machine. He liked in the Vimy only those qualities that allowed it to achieve good results: powerful engines, a significant fuel supply, a large wing area, strength, and good controllability. But there were too many negative elements: a biplane with an entire forest of struts and bracing wires, 2 pairs of main landing gear wheels, and many other features created enormous aerodynamic drag. At the end of the year 1919, Fokker and a group of designers developed a project for a small passenger airplane, which made its first flight in March of the year 1920. Later, a series of these airplanes was sold through KLM. In the advertising of one airline, this airplane was described as undoubtedly a significantly improved Fokker design. 4 examples of the airplane were built. Its construction was entirely typical for that era. 2 pilots sat in open cockpits, one behind the other, and the passengers were seated behind them in an enclosed cabin. The wing was mounted high, stiff, with a crude landing gear shock absorption system. The engines produced either 185 horsepower or 240 horsepower. The maximum speed was only 75 miles per hour, written as 75 miles per hour. The design of the airplane included the possibility of modernization. Soon, a new version appeared, also with 2 pilots and 5 passengers. Different engines were used, ranging from 185 to 450 horsepower. Interestingly, in the Soviet Union, up until the year 1930, 20 examples of Fokker airplanes belonging to the airline Deroluft were operated on the Moscow to Berlin air route. In Germany itself, the company Grulich used several Fokker-type machines under license. Later, as his business expanded, Fokker's enterprises built and sold 2 new airplanes to the United States in the same design style. This machine was noticeably larger than the previous ones, but still single-engined. It used a Liberty engine producing 400 horsepower. In the year 1922, having found his niche in American aircraft manufacturing, Fokker moved to the United States, where he founded the Fokker Aircraft Corporation of America. In total, during his not very long life, he designed up to 200 airplane types, among which Anthony Fokker himself was especially fond of the F.VII model. Thus, the talented pilot, aircraft designer, and industrialist Anthony Herman Gerard Fokker became a Dutch-American entrepreneur. Airplanes of his brand, both military and civil, appeared in many countries around the world, and his main enterprise in New Jersey became the core of the giant syndicate Atlantic Aircraft Corporation. Even before the F.VII, its predecessor had already gained fame for its unusual role. It was converted into a flying hospital for the American frontline aviation of the Army and the Navy. Moreover, this airplane brought Fokker his first world record. On the 2nd and 3rd of May in the year 1923, Lieutenants Oakley Kelly and John McCready made the first non-stop transcontinental flight across the entire territory of the United States, from New York to San Diego in California. They covered a distance of 2,540 miles in 26 hours and 56 minutes. After the success of the previous models, Anthony Fokker decided to return to the idea of a large transport aircraft. In 1921, a new airliner for 8 to 12 passengers appeared. It was the first Fokker aircraft developed entirely in Holland at the factory in Veer. But unlike the earlier models, this aircraft did not attract the interest of airlines. Only the United States Army bought a pair of these machines for its transport needs. The military renamed them Transport 2. One of these aircraft became truly famous. On the 1st and 2nd of May 1923, it completed the first nonstop flight across the entire continent, from New York to San Diego. The crew of McCready and Kelly covered 2,838 miles in 26 hours, 51 minutes. Later, one of these aircraft was converted into a medical transport. At the end of 1922, a new 8-seat model appeared. This aircraft had a unique feature. It could fly either as a biplane or as a monoplane. The idea was that depending on the needs, the aircraft could operate either with a large payload as a biplane or at high speed as a monoplane. The fabric covering of the fuselage was replaced with plywood, but the complex and not very successful design did not bring commercial success this time either. The airline Deroluft wanted to buy the aircraft, but after 2 weeks of trials in Smolensk, the company's management abandoned the idea. The only completed example was purchased by an Austrian airline, but there is no evidence of it ever operating on its routes. Nevertheless, the Dutch entrepreneur did not abandon his attempts to create a large airliner. With the development of air travel, the need for an aircraft with greater capacity and range continued to grow. Work on the fourth attempt began on the 10th of December 1923. On this day, Anthony Fokker signed a contract with KLM to create an 8-seat airliner with long range. The development was led by Walter Rethel. He radically reworked the previous model. The plywood fuselage covering was replaced with fabric, although the internal lining of the passenger cabin remained plywood. The cabin was refined to minimize noise as much as possible. The wingspan increased. The landing gear design changed. The distance between the struts increased to 13 feet, which was meant to make takeoff and landing on grass fields easier. A Rolls-Royce engine was installed on the new aircraft. The airplane was built in January 1924, but it did not fly immediately. During ground tests, the propeller touched the ground, which required increasing the length of the landing gear struts. The 2-bladed propeller was replaced with a 4-bladed one of smaller diameter. The first flight on the 11th of April 1924 was made by the company pilot Hermann Hesse. The prototype tests went quite well. Soon, KLM pilots joined the aircraft evaluations. During the summer, the aircraft underwent experimental operation on the busiest airline routes, and from the 1st of October to the 24th of November of the same year, line pilots carried out a flight from Amsterdam to Batavia, now Jakarta. The aircraft spent nearly a month in Bulgaria, where the engine had to be replaced after an accident. At the time, this was an outstanding achievement for a passenger airplane. Then the aircraft performed several flights throughout the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, enduring its tropical climate. The prototype entered commercial service with KLM in June 1925. By that time, 4 more aircraft had been built for the company. During operation, the engines on the prototype and 3 more aircraft were replaced with Bristol Jupiter engines. The last example was equipped with a Napier Lion engine. Metal propellers replaced wooden ones. Emergency hatches were added to the ceilings of the cabins. Each aircraft had its own custom interior, built by the Mutters Company. The airliners flew on KLM's European routes. However, this did not last long. Despite the successful long-distance flight and fairly high performance, the aircraft was produced only in small numbers. The experience gained from operating this machine and the many improvements led to the creation of an upgraded version. In the new model, the fuselage was lengthened and the cockpit was enclosed. The cabin was now heated. The wing was completely redesigned. The ailerons no longer protruded but blended smoothly into its contours. The stabilizer shapes became more streamlined. The complex landing gear with numerous braces was replaced by a simpler one with telescopic struts. The new landing gear made landings easier on unprepared airfields with uneven runways. By that time, Rethel had returned to Germany, so the refinements were carried out by Platz together with young engineers Jan Rosenschan, Marius Billing, and Bert Grass. They had higher technical education, which ensured a more advanced design. The aircraft was now built in Amsterdam, where Fokker's company had moved at the beginning of 1925. The first example received an air-cooled engine, but the engine compartment was designed from the start to accommodate various engines depending on the airline's choice. The new modification took to the air on the 12th of March 1925, piloted by Grass. The aircraft showed excellent handling. Grace performed loops and Immelman turns with it. During testing, he broke the world endurance record for flights with loads of 2,200 pounds and 3,300 pounds. His time was 3 hours, 3 minutes, 30 seconds. As before, the main customer was the company KLM. For it, Fokker manufactured 11 airliners, and in addition, 4 aircraft were built by the airline itself. Within KLM, the airplane was used both in a passenger configuration and in a cargo version. Many machines were ordered by the French company Sabena, 7 units, and the Polish company LOT, 6 units. Aircraft were also built for other European companies. Strong and reliable machines were operated there for a long and successful time. While working on the routes, they were repeatedly modernized. Many aircraft were operated by airlines up until the beginning of the Second World War, and during the war years, some of them entered military transport aviation. And one specimen flew in the medical aviation of Switzerland until 1955. As far as is known, 1 or 2 aircraft have survived to this day in aviation museums. As in Fokker's previous models, the passenger cabin offered an excellent view. In addition, new conveniences appeared for air travelers. The simplicity of the design and the convenient access to components and systems caused positive impressions among maintenance personnel. However, Fokker himself devoted little time to creating this machine. He had grand plans connected with North America. Other projects were intended for the new market. Therefore, this model became only a stepping stone on the way to them. Throughout its long life, the airplane countless times found itself in extreme situations, but in most cases emerged from them with honor. Thus, in 1928, the Poles Kalina, Skalas, and Klozinak took off from Dublin toward Iraq. Before reaching Baghdad, the airplane was thrown downward by a powerful descending airstream for several hundred meters, but the machine endured and did not break apart. The crew escaped with bruises and scratches. On the 28th of November, 1928, the aviators Bird, Walken, June, and Kimley departed from Rossbar in the direction of the South Pole. It was the most difficult flight. The machine, overloaded with fuel, could not gain the altitude required to cross the glaciers. They had to drain part of the fuel in flight, but new troubles arose, icing and engine cracking. Yet the airplane returned from all hardships unharmed, reaching the goal of the flight. Thus, the machine of Anthony Fokker conquered both poles, the 2 most difficult points of the planet. But perhaps the most original trick was performed by an aircraft that stayed in the air for 150 hours and 40 minutes. It was a record for flight duration. The aircraft with the inscription ? On its fuselage flew a closed route day and night. At a certain time, a tanker biplane appeared above it. The machines matched their airspeeds, and the tanker lowered a refueling hose downward. Anthony Fokker could have been satisfied with the success of his airliner in Europe, but he decided to conquer America as well. Fokker had tried more than once to break into the American market, but circumstances did not allow it. Only in 1925, much later than in Europe, did interest in passenger air transportation finally appear in the United States. Americans began searching for a suitable airliner. The automobile magnate Henry Ford organized special trials in July of 1925. The idea was simple. The competing airplanes had to circle 13 cities of the American Midwest. The total length of the route amounted to about 2,500 miles. The main goal was to find a sufficiently reliable aircraft capable of dispelling the fears of potential American passengers. Fokker decided to present his model for the competition. To increase reliability, he ordered the installation of 2 additional engines on the airplane. At that moment, the chief designer Reinhold Platz was already examining a trimotor variant. Initially, the additional engines were intended to be installed in the wing, but such a modification required too much time. Then Fokker came up with the idea of making the engines underslung. This accelerated the work and also reduced power losses. It also offered advantages in operation. Underslung engines were easier to service and easier to replace. It is no coincidence that this configuration later became standard for modern airliners. The necessary modifications were completed in only 7 weeks. The first flight of the Trimotor airplane took place on the 4th of September, 1925. Fokker specifically returned from the United States to take part in this flight. The aircraft held confidently in the air with all engines operating, as well as with 1 or even 2 engines switched off. On the 8th of September, 1925, only a few days after the first flight, the airplane was sent aboard a steamship to America. Participation in the competition was to become a continuation of its tests. By the way, a single-engine variant was also being prepared, but it crashed shortly before the opening of the trials. On the 26th of September, the Trimotor Fokker arrived in Detroit, the starting point of the competition, and on the 28th of September, it took off along the planned route. The Dutch airliner competed with 16 American airplanes. In terms of reliability, it did not surpass the best competitors, but it usually arrived at the next point first. This attracted the attention of spectators and the press and provided good publicity. It was no coincidence that journalists jokingly renamed the trials. After completing the tour of the cities of the American Midwest, the Trimotor Fokker returned to Detroit on the 3rd of October, effectively winning the competition. After that, the Trimotor airliner was launched into series production. The truth is that the first customers were not airlines, but the United States Army and Edsel Ford. The son of the automotive magnate bought 1 aircraft for the expedition of Richard Byrd and Floyd Bennett to the North Pole. On June 9, 1926, this aircraft took off from Spitsbergen. The crew returned after 15.5 hours with a report claiming that they had reached the North Pole. The pilots received fame no less significant than the first astronauts roughly 35 years later. And the aircraft naturally gained additional advantages in its competition with rivals. Only half a century later did it become known that Bennett and Byrd had not actually reached the pole. The Trimotor Fokker was also purchased by the Dutch Air Force for transport operations, for use as a bomber and reconnaissance aircraft, and also by a Dutch airline. 4 aircraft were bought by Pan American Airways and 2 by Colonial Airways. Pan American used the airliner on the route from Key West, Florida to Havana, Cuba. The Trimotor Fokker spent 1 hour on the trip. Another aircraft was purchased by Richard Byrd for a record nonstop flight from New York to Paris. Charles Lindbergh overtook him, but Byrd still completed his flight in June 1927 on an aircraft named America. Pilots of the Dutch airline also distinguished themselves with a flight on a Trimotor Fokker from the Netherlands to the island of Java in October 1927. Even during the development of the Trimotor model, a project emerged for a more load-capable version with a greater wingspan. This allowed for an increased flight range and opened up prospects for using the airliner on transcontinental routes in the United States. The aircraft appeared in 1928. The number of units produced in this modification significantly exceeded the previous version. This version also became famous for a series of flights. The most significant was completed in 1928 by the Australian Charles Kingsford Smith on an aircraft named Southern Cross. His crew flew across the Pacific Ocean from Oakland, California to Brisbane, Australia, covering 7,500 miles in 83 hours. Series production of these aircraft was organized in the American branch of the Fokker Company, which was called the Atlantic Aircraft Corporation. In reality, it was less a production facility and more an assembly line using ready-made parts manufactured at the factory in Amsterdam. American engines were installed on the assembled aircraft, and they were sold under the name Fokker F.VII Trimotor. They were considered American aircraft. Many airlines in the United States purchased them. An equally large number of European airlines bought aircraft assembled in Amsterdam. In total, 63 units appeared at the Amsterdam factory by 1933. But European demand was so high that Fokker readily sold licenses for the production of these aircraft to other countries. Starting in October 1928, the Polish company Plage i Łaskiewicz built the aircraft. A total of 11 civilian machines were produced there. Most of them went to the Polish airline LOT. In Great Britain, the airliner was produced by the company Avro under the name Avro Model 600-1810. 7 of these 14 units went to Australia, to Kingsford Smith's airline Australian National Airways. The Czech company Avia produced these aircraft for CLS, 8 units for routes to Amsterdam, Zurich, and others, and for CSA, 5 units, as well as for French airlines. 1 aircraft was purchased by the well-known shoe manufacturer Bata. In total, 18 such aircraft were produced by Avia. 3 units were manufactured in Italy and 3 in Spain. However, the largest number of aircraft outside the Netherlands was produced by the Belgian company Sabena. Over 3 years, from 1929 to 1932, 28 units were built there. 27 of them were purchased by the national airline Sabena, making it the world record holder for the number of these aircraft in its fleet. These airliners flew daily from Brussels to several European countries, with the main routes being Brussels to London and Antwerp to Hamburg. Starting in 1935, the aircraft began flying once every 2 weeks from Brussels to Leopoldville, now Kinshasa. This flight took 56 flying hours. From Leopoldville, air transportation was carried out throughout the Belgian Congo. The Dutch airline KLM also had a large fleet of these aircraft, 14 units that operated on European routes. Starting in October 1930, KLM opened one of the longest routes of that era, from Amsterdam to Batavia, now Jakarta. Flights were carried out every 2 weeks. In Batavia, its subsidiary company, KNILM, was based. Using its 6 aircraft, KNILM operated regular flights across the Netherlands East Indies, now Indonesia. 7 aircraft were in service with the Spanish airline LAPE. When the Spanish Civil War began, they were converted into bombers. Despite the fact that the airliner had a fabric covering, it was successfully operated for many years. The truth is that only 1 civilian aircraft survived the Second World War, but perhaps the most famous among them was the aircraft named Southern Cross. It still exists today, preserved in a museum built specifically for it in Brisbane, Australia. The period of flourishing for these aircraft on the world's air routes can be attributed to the years 1927 to 1935, and the leading position once again belonged to the 3-engined Fokker. This same type was also favored by the military. In Czechoslovakia, at the Avia Company, from 1929 to 1932, they produced 21 examples of the aircraft equipped with external bomb racks designed to carry 1,760 pounds of aerial bombs. The Poles also made an effort. 20 machines were modified for use as night bombers. The Polish Air Communication Society LOT purchased 11 aircraft of the same model. It was a progressive step because earlier the Poles had been forced to adapt outdated Farman Goliath bombers for commercial transportation by removing their armament and converting the fuselage interior into a passenger cabin. And conversely, the more technically advanced Fokkers were converted into night bombers, equipped with external bomb racks, bomb-aiming sights, and an upper fuselage turret with a machine gun. The Poles also assigned them to 2 military transport squadrons and to groups responsible for deploying paratrooper detachments. At the beginning of the 1930s, all of these aircraft took part in military maneuvers. In addition, one of the modifications, the so-called float plane version, was fitted by the Poles with 2 floats and armed with a torpedo weighing 1,760 pounds suspended beneath the fuselage. In September 1939, after the defeat of Poland by Nazi Germany, 4 Polish 3-engine bombers and 2 twin-engined reconnaissance aircraft flew to Romanian territory. During the Spanish Civil War, these aircraft in various modifications served in both the Francoist and Republican air forces as transport planes and bombers. They were actively used in combat operations. Nothing is eternal. The Fokker II passed into history. The last aircraft of this type flew in Switzerland until 1955. It was used by a medical pulmonary clinic to treat children suffering from pertussis. Young patients were lifted to an altitude where they could breathe clean, ozonated air. And this is perhaps the kindest memory of a remarkable aircraft.